The material has a life of its own, so you're actually establishing a relationship with another material, and whether you can broaden that to say how you treat the planet or other things, it's really interesting to work with that relationship. Like different yarns act differently, so you're having to pay attention to sort of the life that exists within another material, and that to me is a kind of lesson for paying attention to what's out there and in our world in a way that respects it. It's just another relationship. It is a relationship. We do have a relationship to objects and things and materials. I'm Louise Halsey, and I am a weaver, tapestry artist. We are in the Ozark Mountains, or the Boston Mountains, in northwest part of Arkansas. The property we are on has national forest on two sides. It's along a creek, the Little Mulberry, which flows into the Big Mulberry, which is a scenic river, a wild and scenic river. The places in the nation where traditional things like basketry and chair making and certain kinds of weaving persisted were generally places that were mountainous and impoverished, and those little pockets kept those traditions alive longer than anywhere else. The manufacturing didn't come in and wipe everything out. But I didn't come from Arkansas, and I didn't come from that. I came from downtown Charleston, South Carolina. My parents are both artists. They are now deceased, but they were painters, and my mother became a printmaker. They both did sculpture, so art was always there. Well, as a kid, I always liked color. I always liked stripes. I always liked putting things together, like the way potholders went together, or I did a lot of sewing, so it just seemed there were things that came naturally to me, and the weaving seemed to be able to use those things that felt important to me. I wanted to run off to New York City and work for Andy Warhol in his factory, but I was too scared, so I went to college. I got out of college and I was pretty rootless. For a graduation present, my parents sent me to Aramont, where I studied weaving for 3 weeks with Edwina Bringle, and that was when I finally felt like, when I was working on the loom, I had really found something that really made sense to me to do. When I was doing bright colored tapestry, I just felt like, wow, this is something I really love doing. I was living outside of Atlanta in Roswell, which at the time was the country with like horses and cornfields, where now they're mega shopping centers. And I became secretary of Georgia Designer Craftsmen, which was the state crafts organization. And they had a big annual meeting, and all sorts of people came from all over, including someone named Stephen Driver, who was a potter working at a place called Mark of the Potter in North Georgia. I had weaver friends who knew his weaver friends, and the weavers talked to each other and said, he likes her and she likes him, but they're both playing shy. So we were sort of set up to spend more time together. And he was actually getting ready to move back here. He had built the foundation of the house. He had the slides and he had the stone foundation, which he had built by hand. I had never been to Arkansas. It was appealing to me. This was part of the Back to the Land movement. I liked the idea of growing my own vegetables and washing my clothes by hand, and that whole thing had a great appeal to me. And so this vision of a more agrarian, rural, do-it-yourself kind of lifestyle is what drew me in. I couldn't have predicted it, but it was the thing that felt the most right to me. I like to get down here by 9 or earlier. My studio is in my house, so I just have to go downstairs. The kind of tapestry I do, the weft yarn completely covers up the warp. So rather than having a 50-50 or a meshing of two colors to blending to create another color that I would never quite have control over, the way I do tapestry, it's totally the weft showing, so I can look down, and when I make my color choices, for the most part I can pick the colors I think are going to work. When I'm weaving, you know, I'm trying to put the best of my thoughts into my weaving, not just the best of the yarn or the best of how I beat it down or something else. The house series was where that started to happen for me. With Crack House, it actually started, literally, Charleston had a serious earthquake, I think in the late 1800s. So growing up, a lot of the houses that I saw had little cracks in them. When I looked up at the ceiling of the house I lived in with the plaster was all cracked. So it was partly growing up with earthquakes, partly playing off the crack phenomenon of drugs and what that was doing to neighborhoods, partly cracks in the family. I mean, it was just a way for me to draw together a lot of problematic things I was working with and try to make them evident visually. I wanted them to be pleasing, I wanted them to be well made, but for me they had content. It was a way for me to sort of assuage that feeling of wanting to get more of what I think is important into my work. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having no intention and just doing the stripes. That's fine if that's what works for you, but there is a certain pleasure in trying to push the categories and open up the possibilities. I would not just free-form go to the loom and go, oh boy, I'm going to have fun today. I have done that. It doesn't really turn out well. You really do need a plan, especially with tapestry. You need to have a map that you're following. The tapestries have been evolving, and I've gotten more sort of my thinking involved in those. I've also, since I took a class at the University of Georgia in the history of pre-Columbian Peruvian textiles, and for that class I did a figure, a three-dimensional figure. She was on bamboo, and I wove her dress and I made her face and her hair. They're now made out of beaver sticks, which are the sticks the beavers have chewed and wash up when we have high water. And they're basically variations of a self-portrait. I've just decided they're Louise in her various outfits and Louise with her various outlooks. I'm really working again with just designing the faces in a way that is interesting, using the format of weaving. I've always done teaching as part of my income, and I do love teaching. I love that the children seem to be starved for an activity that uses their hands. It's just really a lovely experience to introduce weaving and then hear the calm and quiet that goes with that as they're paying attention. One thing gets done and it gives me the idea for the next thing, or something comes along that gives me an idea. Just continually being interested in the process and trying to improve and hone what it is you want to do.